When you walk through a modern city, and you look up at a massive glass and steel skyscraper, you naturally expect a certain kind of foundation.
Right, you expect modern engineering, poured concrete, rebar, that kind of thing.
Exactly. But imagine if you went down into the basement of that gleaming, ultramodern tower, and instead of concrete, you found, like, ancient Roman arches.
Oh, wow.
Just
Yeah.
these carefully carved, mathematically perfect stone blocks holding the entire thing up. Suddenly, the way you understand that building completely changes.
It's not just a new building anymore.
Right. You realize the architect wasn't just building something new in a vacuum. They were having this deeply intentional conversation with antiquity.
They were taking the absolute most durable, time-tested tools available to support a completely different kind of structure.
Yes. And today we're going down into the basement of one of the most influential texts in human history to look at its foundation. Welcome to this deep dive.
I am very excited for this one.
Our mission today is to examine two monumental texts from antiquity. On one side, we have the foundational Greek historian Thucydides.
Writing about the Peloponnesian War back in the 5th century BC.
Right. And on the other side, we have the author of Luke Acts, who wrote a 2-volume history of early Christianity, but in the 1st century A.D.
And on the surface, those two might seem like a totally bizarre pairing.
Yeah, they really do. Because, Thucydides is writing this gritty, hyper-realistic account of a devastating decades-long war between Athens and Sparta.
Exactly. He's dissecting military strategy, political betrayal, and just raw power dynamics.
But then Luke, writing centuries later, is compiling an account of the life of Jesus of Nazareth and the spread of this localized Jewish sect across the Roman Empire.
And here's the kicker. There are no direct quotes from Thucydides anywhere in Luke Acts.
Wait, none at all.
Not a single one. You won't find an explicit verbal link saying, as Thucydides once wrote.
Huh. So why even compare them?
Well, that absence is exactly where the scholarly detective work begins. We are looking at the study of historiography.
Which is, just for you listening, the study of how history is written.
Right. Scholars are fiercely debating whether Luke consciously imitates the methodology of Thucydides. And if he does, what does that mean for how you, the reader, are supposed to understand the historical reliability and the very genre of the Bible's narrative?
We are looking for shared DNA. We're trying to figure out how an ancient author signaled to their audience, hey, this is serious history, not a myth.
And it's a fascinating puzzle.
It is. And just as a quick note for you listening, as we look at this massive stack of scholarly analyses and linguistic data, we are treating this strictly from an analytical, historical perspective.
Right. The sources we have dive into some intense debates about theology, historicity, and even the political nature of human conflict.
Yeah, and we aren't here to take a theological or political side. We're here to impartially lay out what the original source material says.
To look at the linguistic tools these authors used, and to understand the ideas they were trying to convey to their ancient audiences.
Absolutely. So let's start at the front door. If you want to figure out what an ancient historian is trying to achieve, you look at their preface. How they introduce themselves to the reader.
The preface is everything in ancient literature. It's the author's contract with the reader.
Okay, so what does Thucydides' contract look like?
Well, in the Greco-Roman world, Thucydides 1.22 is universally considered the gold standard of historical methodology.
The gold standard?
Yeah. When he sits down to write about the Peloponnesian War, he makes this highly calculated, aggressive move.
Aggressive how?
He explicitly distinguishes his rigorous analytical approach from the poets and the logographers.
The logographers, like the storytellers.
Exactly, like Homer or even his predecessor Herodotus, who often wove tales of the gods into their histories. Thucydides explicitly rejects the mythic.
He just tosses the gods out completely.
Completely. The Greek phrase he uses is me mythides, literally, not fabulous or not mythic. He strips the gods out of the narrative.
He's drawing a line in the sand. He's basically telling his audience, if you want entertaining fables about Zeus intervening in a battle, go read someone else. I'm doing something different.
Exactly that. He bases his entire historical project on strict human observation and investigation.
So, boots on the ground kind of stuff?
Yes. He uses terms related to opsis, which refers to direct seeing or eyewitness observation, and ako, which refers to hearing.
Okay, opsis and ako, seeing and hearing.
Right. And he talks about cross-verification. In fact, if you read 1.22 closely, he actually complains about how incredibly frustrating the process was.
Wait, really? He complains?
Oh, yeah. He talks about how eyewitnesses to the exact same event would give him wildly different accounts, either because their memories were faulty or because they had a political bias toward one side or the other.
Oh, wow. That is such a fascinating detail because it sounds so thoroughly modern.
Doesn't.
It sounds like a 21st century investigative journalist complaining about conflicting sources in a war zone. It gives you this immediate sense that Thucydides is doing the hard, unglamorous work of cross-examining people.
And it builds immense credibility. He is establishing a secular, rational inquiry. He is telling the reader that his account was not easily acquired. It was forged through exhausting critical analysis.
Okay, so that's Thucydidean standard.
Right.
Rational, exhausting, secular investigation.
Right. Now, hold that standard in your mind, and let's jump forward a few centuries to the prologue of the Gospel of Luke, specifically Luke chapter 1, verses 1 through 4.
The front door of the gospel.
Exactly. This is a single, elegantly crafted periodic sentence in Greek, and it makes some very bold, specific claims that sound remarkably familiar.
Okay, let's break down what a periodic sentence actually means for the listener, because it's not just a matter of good grammar, it's a psychological tool.
Oh, absolutely.
In a periodic sentence, the main point, the core verb, is suspended until the very end. You stack all these dependent clauses up front.
Right, right.
So the reader have to, hold their breath, intellectually speaking, tracking all these complex ideas, waiting for the resolution. It creates a sense of immense rhetorical power and authority when the sentence finally lands.
That's a great way to describe it. It requires a high level of literary competence, both to write and to read.
So what does Luke actually say in this massive suspended sentence?
He claims that many have undertaken to draw up an account, but he has decided to write an orderly account. The Greek word is kathexis.
Cathexis, orderly.
Right, and he says it's based on investigated eyewitness testimony. He uses the word autopton, which is actually where we get the word autopsy.
Oh, wow, autopsy. That implies some serious clinical looking.
Yes.
Yes.
And he says he investigated everything carefully or accurately using the adverb akribous.
And what is the stated goal of all this careful investigation? Why is he holding the reader's breath in this big sentence?
He says he is writing this to a man named Theophilus, so that Theophilus may have certainty. The Greek word is asphalion concerning the things he has been taught.
Okay, so certainty. Asphalion.
So look at the overlap in the vocabulary of precision. Thucydides uses the noun akribia to describe his meticulous accuracy. Luke uses the adverb akribus.
It's basically the same root.
Exactly. Both are using complex, sophisticated subordination and participial constructions typical of highly educated Hellenistic prose. They are both adopting the authoritative, historiographical voice.
It's the ancient equivalent of putting based on a true story at the very beginning of a film.
That's a perfect analogy.
When you see those words on the screen, your posture changes.
Right.
You evaluate the characters differently than if you were watching a fantasy movie.
You do.
By utilizing the conventions of the historical preface, claims of investigation, eyewitnesses, precision, Luke is placing a specific lens over the narrative that follows. He's instructing Theophilus on how to consume the text.
He is. But the sources we're looking at introduce a massive point of friction here.
Uh-oh, here we go.
Yeah. Not all scholars agree that Luke is deliberately mirroring Thucydides. You have researchers like Loveday Alexander who look at the specific vocabulary of Luke's prologue and, well, they pump the brakes on the whole historiography comparison.
Wait, Loveday Alexander, what does she argue?
Her work is pivotal here. She argues that if you conduct a rigorous comparative analysis of Luke's specific syntax and vocabulary, the closest parallels aren't actually found in the grand political histories of Thucydides or Polybius.
Where they found them?
The closest structural parallels are found in ancient technical or scientific prefaces.
Wait, really? Like what kind of texts?
We're talking about ancient medical treatises, engineering manuals, or mathematical texts.
Oh, that completely shifts the paradigm.
Right.
So instead of Luke puffing out his chest and saying, I am the next great political historian in the tradition of Athens, he might be saying, I am a technician, giving you a precise, methodical breakdown of the data.
That is Alexander's argument. She suggests that technical authors in antiquity also needed to establish credibility, but they did it through a slightly different linguistic tradition than the political historians.
Emphasizing different things.
Exactly. They emphasized methodology, personal autopsy, and orderly presentation, which maps perfectly onto Luke 1.1 to 4.
Wow. So the debate isn't just a simple binary of, did Luke read Thucydides or not?
No, it's a much more nuanced question. Does this prologue signal a classical historiographical self-presentation, or does it signal a scientific, technical reliability?
I see the distinction, but frankly, if I'm looking at the end result, the function seems remarkably similar.
How so?
Well, whether he is adopting the persona of a master historian or a master engineer, the Greek style itself is a massive flex.
Oh, undeniably.
Our sources highlight that Luke writes this prologue in an elevated, Atticizing Greek style. And Attic Greek was the prestige dialect of classical Athens.
It was the language of the educated elite.
Right. So by utilizing it, Luke is signaling intense literary competence to Theophilus. He's essentially saying, I have mastered the intellectual currency of the Greco-Roman world.
Yes.
And that matters because, he's writing about a crucified Jewish carpenter from a backwater province of the empire.
A subject that would normally be dismissed by the elite.
Exactly. So by using this high-level, sophisticated grammar, he's telling Theophilus and you, the broader audience, that this narrative isn't just some localized religious fable. It belongs on the top shelf of your library.
The medium elevates the subject matter. That's a great point. But to truly understand the contrast between these two, we have to look past the how of their prefaces and look at the why.
Okay, the why. What is the ultimate end goal of all this rigorous investigation?
Well, Thucydides famously states in his prologue that he wrote his history to be a toma esai, a possession for all time.
A possession for all time. It's pretty confident.
Very. He explicitly says he isn't writing a prize essay to be heard once and forgotten. He wants his work to have pragmatic, political utility for future generations.
Because he believes he has unlocked the fundamental code of human nature, right?
Precisely. Because human nature is static, he assumes these same political conflicts, these same betrayals, will inevitably happen again.
So future generals and statesmen can use his book as a survival guide.
Exactly.
It's a breathtakingly arrogant and yet entirely accurate assessment of his own work.
He was a man who understood the weight of his own intellect, for sure. Now, contrast that with Luke. Luke's stated goal is not a political toolkit for all time.
Right. He said his goal was asphilion, certainty.
Yes. He wants to give Theophilus assurance or certainty about the Christian teachings he has received. Thucydides is offering a secular, cynical analysis of human failure. Luke is offering theological and historical assurance of divine fulfillment.
But this is where I get tripped up, and where I think a modern reader really struggles.
Okay, lay it on me.
Thucydides is writing about secular politics, military strategies, and unchanging, deeply flawed human nature.
Right.
Luke is writing about divine fulfillment, miracles, angelic visitations, and a resurrection. How do those two worldviews mix?
It's a massive clash.
Can you honestly use the tools of a secular rationalist historian to validate claims of divine intervention?
That tension is the central paradox scholars are trying to resolve. Luke is taking the absolute highest academic standards of his day, the Hellenistic conventions of rational inquiry, and he is deliberately subordinating them to a theological purpose.
Wow.
He is making a radical claim to the ancient mind that divine intervention isn't happening in some nebulous, mythic past governed by the whims of Mount Olympus.
And that's not Mia Mythes.
Exactly. It happened in the verifiable, investigated, orderly realm of human history. The miracles aren't myth. They are opsis in a coup seen and heard by witnesses.
So Luke is taking the Thucydidean standard and pushing it to its absolute breaking point.
He really is.
He's saying, I will give you your rational investigation, but you have to accept that the investigation leads to an empty tomb.
Precisely. And the prologue is merely the promise. It tells us what they intend to do. But if we really want to see how they build these histories, how they manipulate the reader's experience of time and reality, we have to move past the vocabulary.
We have to get the magnifying glass out.
We do. We have to look at the absolute molecular level of their writing. We have to look at the grammar.
Oh boy. Which means we need to talk about verbs.
We do.
And I know for you listening, the moment someone mentions Greek grammar, there is a temptation to just tune out entirely.
Please don't.
Yeah, I promise you, this isn't a traumatic flashback to high school language classes. The verbs are where the actual trick is hidden.
They are the engine of the text?
Because in ancient Greek, verbs do a lot more than just tell you if something happened yesterday, today, or tomorrow.
Right. The modern English speaker usually thinks of verbs purely in terms of tense time. I ran, I run, I will run.
Simple enough.
But in ancient Greek, while time is a factor, the primary engine of the verb is something called verbal aspect.
Verbal aspect.
Aspect is all about the author's viewpoint. It's the subjective choice the author makes about how to present the action to the reader.
Okay, so it's a choice.
Yes. Our sources rely heavily on a groundbreaking linguistic framework developed by a scholar named Constantine Campbell.
Constantine, yeah, what did he figure out?
He revolutionized how we understand aspect by moving away from strictly temporal definitions, time definitions, and utilizing spatial metaphors instead, specifically the concepts of distance and proximity.
Distance and proximity. Think of it like camera angles in cinema, right?
That's a perfect way to look at it.
A director can film a battle scene using a massive, sweeping wide shot from a helicopter.
Right.
Or they can strap a camera to a soldier's chest for an extreme, shaky close-up.
Right.
The event is exactly the same, but the psychological impact on the audience is entirely different based on where the director places the lens.
That is an excellent way to visualize Campbell's theory. So let's look at where Thucydides places his camera.
Okay, where is his lens?
Linguistic analysis shows that Thucydides relies heavily on what are called aorist and imperfect verbs.
Aorist and imperfect.
Yes, in Campbell's spatial framework, the aorist aspect signals perfective action and, crucially, remoteness. It summarizes an action as a whole from a distance.
Okay.
The imperfect aspect also signals remoteness, but it's used for ongoing or repeated past actions.
So if Thucydides is constantly using these remote verbs, these wide helicopter shots, what is that doing to the reader's psychology?
It creates a profound sense of detached analytical distance. Thucydides is actively backgrounding the past actions.
Stepping back from the mess.
Exactly. He is putting the chaotic events of the war under a microscope and analyzing them with a cool, dispassionate eye. It creates a formal, highly objective tone.
He's saying to the reader, do not get caught up in the emotion of the moment. Look at these events that happened over there, and let us calmly dissect the structural reasons why they occurred.
That's exactly his posture.
So Thucydides is writing like a forensic pathologist.
A pathologist. I like that.
Yeah, he's got the cold case file open on the stainless steel table. The violence has already happened. The blood is dried. And he is just clinically detailing the cause of death of the Athenian Empire.
It's brilliant, but it's very cold.
Now, if Luke is mirroring Thucydides, does he use the same clinical camera angles?
This is where Luke radically departs from the Thucydidean model.
Oh, really?
Yeah. While Luke certainly uses aorist to move the basic plot along, I mean, you need wide shots to establish the scene, Luke heavily utilizes perfect verbs at critical theological junctures.
Perfect verbs, not aorist or imperfect.
Right. For example, right there in his prologue, he uses the word pepaloraphoромenion, which translates roughly to fulfilled or accomplished.
Okay.
According to Campbell's framework, the perfect aspect does not signal remoteness, it creates heightened proximity.
Heightened proximity.
Yeah.
So the camera strapped to the chest, the extreme close-up.
More than just a close-up. In older grammars, the perfect tense was usually described merely as an action completed in the past with ongoing results.
Which sounds pretty dry.
It does. But in Campbell's spatial view, it is an active, aggressive drawing near of the events. It drags the past into the reader's present lap.
Whoa.
Yeah, Luke uses these perfect verbs to bring the fulfillment of these divine events vividly into the immediate space of the reader.
So if Thucydides is the detached forensic pathologist, Luke writes like a live streamer in a war zone.
That is a great analogy.
He is bringing breaking news right to your screen.
Yeah.
He wants you to feel the heat and the immediacy of it.
He wants you right there with him.
But let me push back here because this seems like a contradiction to me.
Okay, let's hear it.
If both of these authors are claiming to write accurate history, but Luke's grammar is aggressively pushing the reader into this emotional, immediate space, doesn't that undermine his objectivity?
That is the big question.
Because if I'm watching a live streamer, I might doubt their analytical distance compared to the pathologist. Does this extreme close-up grammar prove he's actually writing theology and just dressing it up as history?
That is a very sharp critique, and it cuts to the absolute heart of the scholarly debate. A modern secular historian might argue exactly that. The urgency and theological framing compromise the historical objectivity.
It's biased.
Right. But we have to evaluate Luke within the cognitive environment of the first century.
Okay, meaning what?
For an ancient author, theology and history were not mutually exclusive categories. Luke's grammatical choices don't negate his rigorous investigation. Rather, they reveal the stakes of his project.
The Sikhs.
Yes. He investigates with the meticulousness of a historian, but he presents the findings with the existential urgency of an evangelist.
Because for Luke, the events he's describing aren't just geopolitical trivia.
Exactly. Thucydides thinks his history will help a future statesman avoid a bad treaty with Sparta.
Which is helpful.
But Luke believes the history he is recording will literally save your soul.
Oh, yeah. That's a bit of a step up.
Just a bit. He believes these events demand an immediate personal response from Theophilus. Naturally, the spatial grammar is going to reflect that massive difference in stakes.
He uses aspect to foreground theological nearness because the implications of the history are actively bearing down on the reader.
Exactly.
Because grammar isn't just rules, it's the invisible architecture of persuasion.
I love that phrasing.
But this grammatical urgency, this heightened proximity in Luke, it really hits critical mass when the characters in the narrative actually open their mouths to speak.
Oh, yes. The speeches.
Which brings us to the most fiercely contested overlap between these two writers.
The art of the ancient speech, or the logoi.
To understand the scale of this issue, you really have to look at the raw data. Roughly 25 to 30% of the entire book of Acts is made up of speeches.
That's a massive portion of the text.
You have Peter preaching at Pentecost, Stephen delivering his massive defense before the Sanhedrin, Paul arguing in the synagogues and before Roman governors.
Right.
These speeches aren't just filler, they are the structural pillars holding up the entire narrative architecture.
And Thucydides is famous for his speeches too. The Million Dialogue, Pericles, Funeral Oration. These are some of the most famous pieces of rhetoric in Western literature.
But Thucydides makes a rather startling admission about his speeches in that famous prologue we discussed earlier, doesn't he?
He does, and it's a huge problem for modern historians. In 1.22, immediately after promising his rigorous investigation, Thucydides explicitly admits to the impossibility of remembering the exact words of speeches.
He just admits it.
Right there in the text. He says it was difficult to carry them in memory, both the ones he heard himself and the ones reported to him by others.
Okay, so what did he do?
So he lays out his methodology. He states that he composed the speeches based on what was demanded by the occasion or what was most opportune, while adhering as closely as possible to the general sense of what was actually said.
I mean, if I'm a modern historian looking at that admission, I'm blowing the whistle.
You're calling foul.
Absolutely. Yeah. If a biographer today said, well, I didn't have a tape recorder, so I just wrote what I thought the president probably needed to say in that moment to make my thematic point, we would instantly label that book historical fiction.
We'd move it right out of the nonfiction section.
Exactly. But you're saying in antiquity, this wasn't considered a breach of ethics.
It was not a breach. It was the standard operating procedure. Ancient historians used speeches as vital interpretive tools.
Interpretive tools.
Not transcripts.
Right. They weren't trying to provide stenographic transcripts. The speeches illuminated the underlying motives, the psychological character of the speaker, and the hidden political or theological reasoning driving the events. So it was the historian's job to articulate the meaning of the moment through the mouth of the historical figure.
Exactly.
Which logically leads to a massive problem for the book of Acts.
And it sure does.
Because if Luke is operating in the tradition of Thucydides and utilizing the same historiographical playbook, are we forced to conclude that Luke just made up the speeches of Peter and Paul?
Or are they just, Luke's theological fan fiction?
Yeah.
Well, this specific question divides the scholarly community into two deeply entrenched camps.
Okay, let's hear camp one.
One side uses the Thucydidean standard to defend Luke's historical credibility. They argue that because ancient historians regularly shaped speeches to convey the speaker's general sense rather than a verbatim transcript, Luke's speeches are historically credible within their genre.
Because he's following the rules of his time.
Exactly. They argue Luke is faithfully capturing the kerygma.
Kerygma? What's that?
The core apostolic preaching of the early church. They say he's giving you the genuine theological substance of what Peter or Paul preached, even if Luke, as the master author, crafted the specific Atticizing Greek phrasing to fit his narrative flow.
So that camp says he's giving us the historical gist, and that counts as history.
Exactly.
What's the counter-argument from the other camp?
The other side counters that appealing to Thucydides doesn't give Luke a free pass on historicity. They argue that ancient speechwriting was a highly literary, highly rhetorical exercise taught in the schools of rhetoric.
It was an art form.
Yes. So if Thucydides is freely inventing dialogue to serve his thematic purposes, which many classicists believe he did, and Luke is adopting that same convention, then we must treat the speeches and acts as substantially theological and literary creations of the author.
Wow.
In this view, the speeches tell us more about Luke's theology in the late 1st century than they do about the historical Peter or Paul's exact words decades earlier.
It's the difference between this is the essence of what Paul said versus this is what Luke wants you to think Paul said to prove his point.
That's a great summary of the debate.
And it seems to me that the function of the speeches in these two texts is wildly different, even if the structural tool is the same.
How do you mean?
Well, when I read Thucydides' Take the Melian dialogue, for example, it's this drawn-out, brutally cynical debate. The Athenians are basically telling the Melians, the strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must.
It's a chilling passage.
It is.
Yes.
It's a dissection of raw power. It's philosophical and completely secular.
Yes. Thucydides uses long, antithetical debates to dissect the unchanging nature of human power dynamics and self-interest.
Now, contrast that with Luke. The speeches in Acts are generally much shorter. They're heavily summarized. And crucially, their primary rhetorical engine is the citation of the Old Testament.
That is the defining feature, absolutely.
Peter stands up at Pentecost. There's a chaotic scene.
Yeah.
And his immediate move is to start quoting the prophet Joel or King David from the Septuagint.
Because Luke is using the speeches for a completely different end. He is using them to prove redemptive fulfillment.
Fulfillment of the scriptures.
Right. He is meticulously demonstrating how the bewildering events of Jesus' life, crucifixion, and resurrection are the logical climax of the ancient Jewish scriptures.
Which is very different from secular power dynamics.
And furthermore, these speeches are the active engine that pushes the missionary plot forward.
They move the story.
Exactly. In Thucydides, a speech usually precedes a battle or a political betrayal. In Acts, a speech usually catalyzes mass conversions, ignites a riot, or pushes the gospel outward to a new geographic region.
Which brings up what is easily my favorite detail from the sources regarding how Luke handles speeches.
Acts 17.
Acts chapter 17. Paul's speech at the Areopagus in Athens. This is where all these threads collide in the most spectacular way.
The thematic resonance in Acts 17 is genuinely incredible. It is a masterclass in contextualization.
Walk the listener through this because the layers are phenomenal. Paul, this Jewish Christian missionary, travels to Athens.
Right.
Athens is the intellectual capital of the ancient world. It is literally the city whose history Thucydides chronicled centuries earlier, the city of Pericles and Socrates.
The literal home turf of classical rhetoric.
Exactly. And Paul stands up in the Areopagus, the ancient council, and delivers a speech.
But he doesn't quote the prophet Joel here.
No, he shifts his strategy completely.
He engages directly with Greek intellectual traditions. He points to their altar to the unknown God. He quotes Greek poets like Aratus.
He is speaking their language.
He is standing in Thucydides' backyard, playing the sophisticated Greek rhetorical game to introduce them to a resurrected Jewish rabbi.
Luke portrays Paul as the ultimate adaptable orator. He adopts the very Hellenistic rhetorical tools we are discussing to subvert the Greek worldview from the inside out. He uses their own philosophy to demonstrate the supremacy of his message.
It's brilliant, and I have to challenge this whole framework again.
Bring it on.
Let's go back to Luke's prologue. He promised Theophilus Asphalean certainty.
If Thucydides admits to punching up the dialogue for dramatic and analytical effect, and we assume Luke is highly educated, and utilizing this same historiographical playbook, how does that give Theophilus certainty?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because if I know the author is putting words in the apostles' mouths, shaping their speeches to fit a literary theme, my certainty evaporates. How could a first-century reader feel certainty under those conditions?
To answer that, we have to radically recalibrate our modern definition of certainty.
Okay, recalibrate.
For a modern reader, certainty means a verbatim transcript, an audio recording, a time-stamped video. We equate certainty with mechanical reproduction.
We want the raw data.
Right. But for a first-century educated reader like Theophilus, certainty was derived from logical coherence, alignment with known tradition, and the moral or theological truth conveyed by the narrative as a whole.
So the truth wasn't in the exact syllable, it was in the substance.
Exactly. If Luke accurately captured the core apostolic preaching and faithfully demonstrated how it fulfilled the ancient scriptures, a first-century reader would absolutely perceive that as Asphalean.
Even if the specific words were crafted by Luke.
Even then, the rhetorical shaping of the speech, the elevated Greek syntax that didn't negate the truth of it, to the ancient mind, the elevated rhetoric was the necessary and proper vehicle for the truth.
Wow.
If the speech wasn't well crafted, they might actually doubt the author's competence and, by extension, his reliability.
The medium was the message, and the medium was ancient rhetoric. That requires a huge mental shift for us.
It really does.
Now, these speeches, whether it's an Athenian general demanding surrender or the Apostle Paul preaching resurrection, they don't happen in a peaceful vacuum.
No, they certainly do not.
In both of these texts, the greatest speeches occur when society is quite literally tearing itself apart. The context is chaos. Let's look at the backdrop of these narratives, the anatomy of societal collapse.
And in ancient Greek, there is a specific, highly loaded term for this concept: stasis.
Stasis. Now, in modern English, if a doctor says a patient is in stasis, or a sci-fi movie puts someone in a stasis pod, it means staying still, right? A state of equilibrium or frozen animation.
Right.
But in ancient Greek, it means almost the exact opposite.
It really does. In the context of ancient Greek historiography, stasis is a rhetorical commonplace of topos. It means civil strife, factional conflict, internal rebellion, or complete societal breakdown.
So not standing still, tearing apart.
Exactly. It is the tearing apart of the civic fabric. For Thucydides, this is a central, obsessive theme of his entire work.
Where do we see this most clearly?
The most famous example is his extended excursus on the Civil War in Corcyra, found in Book 3, chapters 82 and 83.
The Corcyra excursus is a terrifying piece of writing. Our sources highlight that Thucydides uses this specific conflict to analyze how the pressure of war completely corrupts the human soul.
It's a dark, dark passage.
And the detail that is so chilling and, frankly, deeply relevant to our modern political climate is how he describes war-corrupting language.
That is arguably one of the most profound sociological observations in classical literature.
It really is.
Thucydides writes that during the brutal stasis in Corcyra, words change their usual meanings.
He describes a total moral inversion. Reckless audacity was suddenly praised as loyal courage. Prudent hesitation was branded as cowardice. Moderation was seen as a cloak for unmanliness.
It's completely upside down.
Ability to understand all sides of a question meant you were totally unfitted for action. The political polarization was so extreme, the factional hatred so deep, that the very definitions of moral concepts were inverted to serve violence.
It is the ultimate degradation of society, because once you can't even agree on what the word courage or treason means, social bonds dissolve. Neighbors slaughter neighbors.
Thucydides uses stasis as a diagnostic tool. He is pulling back the skin of civilization to show the dark, rotting core of human nature underneath.
That's exactly his aim.
Now, how does this connect to the Gospel of Luke? Our sources show that more recent scholarship has moved beyond just comparing the vocabulary of the prefaces and is now looking at these broader thematic parallels.
Yes, this is a newer wave of research.
Scholars have noted that Luke utilizes this exact same stasis motif, particularly in his account of the trial and passion of Jesus in Luke chapter 23.
This is a major paradigm shift in how we read it.
It really is.
Oh.
We usually read the crucifixion purely as a theological event, the atonement for sin. You're saying Luke also frames the crucifixion of Jesus as a Thucydidean societal collapse?
He deliberately employs the vocabulary of civic breakdown. During the trial of Jesus, before Pilate and Herod, Luke repeatedly uses words like stasis and thorobos, which means tumult or riot.
Thorobos.
Yeah. The accusations leveled against Jesus by the religious leaders are framed explicitly in the political moral vocabulary of internal conflict. He is accused of subverting the nation, forbidding the payment of taxes, and stirring up the people.
He is accused of being an agent of stasis.
Exactly. And this theme continues aggressively throughout the book of Acts. Wherever the apostles go, their preaching almost inevitably results in stasis.
Yeah, that's true.
There are riots in the synagogues, mobs in the city squares of Thessalonica and Ephesus, civic uproar in Jerusalem. Both Thucydides and Luke use the crucible of conflict to interpret the events they are describing.
So Thucydides uses conflict as a diagnostic tool to show the disease.
Yeah.
Does Luke view the outcome of that conflict the same way?
They have fundamentally opposing worldviews on the resolution of conflict.
How so?
Thucydides is deeply, profoundly pessimistic. For him, stasis is a symptom of a cyclical, fallen human nature for which there is no cure.
No cure at all.
None. As long as human beings are human, under the pressure of war or plague, society will inevitably degenerate into violence and moral inversion. It's a closed loop of human ruin.
That's incredibly bleak. And Luke, how does he resolve the stasis?
Luke reframes stasis theologically. He doesn't deny the reality of the social breakdown. The trial of Jesus is portrayed as a moment of profound, tragic injustice. The crowd chooses to release Barabbas, who Luke explicitly notes was imprisoned for an actual stasis and murder in the city, and they demand the execution of the innocent Jesus.
It's the ultimate inversion of justice, much like Corcyra.
Yes. But for Luke, the conflict doesn't just reveal the brokenness of humanity. It actively fulfills prophetic Old Testament patterns of the rejected prophet.
So Thucydides uses stasis to show that we are trapped in a cycle of destruction. Luke uses the exact same concept, the same vocabulary, to show how God enters the destruction to break the cycle.
He uses the conflict as a crucible to forge something new.
Precisely. That is the genius of Luke's narrative. In Thucydides, stasis destroys the community. In Luke Acts, stasis is actively resolved through repentance, the pouring out of the Holy Spirit, and the creation of a new, unified community, the early church.
It builds rather than destroys.
Right. Even more dramatically in Acts, the riots and opposition are actually the mechanism that drives the gospel mission outward.
Yes. The persecution in Jerusalem forces the believers to scatter to Judea and Samaria. A riot in Ephesus pushes Paul further along his journey.
In Luke's theology, human stasis is hijacked by divine providence to achieve global expansion. The wrath of man is made to serve the purposes of God.
That is an incredible contrast. Thucydides shows you the spiral downward into the abyss of human nature. Luke shows you an explosion outward into the world, driven by the Spirit.
And to truly see how Luke orchestrates this massive structural shift from localized conflict in a Jerusalem courtroom to this global expansion across the Roman Empire, we need to pull our lens all the way back.
Way back.
We need to look at the systemic flow of the entire narrative architecture.
We're moving from the micro level of grammar to the macro level of text structure.
Yeah.
And our sources utilize a highly technical analytical framework for this called systemic functional linguistics, or SFL.
Okay, let's break down SFL because it sounds intimidating, but the core premise makes a lot of sense.
It's very logical once you get into it.
It looks at how authors organize reality on the page. SFL examines three metafunctions of a text: the ideational, the interpersonal, and the textual.
Right.
So ideational is basically what is happening in the subject matter, the world the author is building. Interpersonal is who is talking to whom, the relationship the author is trying to establish with the reader.
Yeah.
And textual is how the information is organized and flows from sentence to sentence.
Let's apply that framework to Thucydides first. Looking at his textual flow, Thucydides uses what scholars call an analytic seasonal cohesion.
Analytic and seasonal.
Yes. He organizes his massive history strictly by the summers and winters of the war. He tracks parallel military campaigns happening simultaneously across different Greek city-states.
It's like a sprawling, multi-point of view geopolitical documentary.
Exactly.
Meanwhile, over in Sparta, this army was marching. Later that winter in Corinth, this fleet was built. It's highly structured, but very wide-ranging.
Yes. And within that structure, we look at his theme room flow.
Theme room. Explain that.
In linguistics, the theme is the known information at the start of a clause, and the reme is the new information being introduced. Thucydides frequently uses this flow to shift away from the narrative action and into his own authorial diagnosis of human affliction.
So he uses the flow to insert himself.
Right. He will describe a battle and then use the reme to halt the story and analyze the structural causes of the war or the psychology of the generals.
He literally pauses the movie to give you a lecture on political science.
He can't help himself.
Okay, so how does Luke structure his reality?
Luke Acts uses a teleological geographic progression.
Teleological meaning it is moving relentlessly toward a specific, destined end goal.
Yes. His narrative isn't bouncing around tracking simultaneous events like Thucydides. It is a single focus arrow flying from Jerusalem straight to the heart of the Roman Empire, Rome itself.
There is a massive sense of momentum. The journey motif is incredibly strong, especially in the second half of Acts.
And textually, his flow moves cohesively in a repeating pattern. Conflict, followed by the citation of scripture, followed by a gospel resolution.
It's a rhythm.
Every event is tethered to the fulfillment of the Old Testament. Interpersonally, while Thucydides remains the detached clinical analyst hovering above the fray, Luke uses the narrative to engage Theophilus directly.
The interpersonal metafunction is actively driving Theophilus toward that asphelion, that certainty we talked about.
Exactly. And the ideational reality Luke constructs is profoundly different. In Thucydides' world, gods are irrelevant. Human power is the only force.
But in Luke's world,
God, the resurrected Jesus, and the Holy Spirit are active, constant participants in history, interacting dynamically with human agents.
so we've gone through the prologues, the spatial grammar of the verbs, the methodology of composed speeches, the theme of societal collapse, and the linguistic architecture of the whole narrative.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have, and it brings us back to a vital question raised in our sources. Which Thucydides? Did the author of Luke Acts actually sit down at a desk, unroll a heavy, expensive papyrus scroll of Thucydides' Peloponnesian War, and say, All right, I'm going to map my Jesus narrative directly onto this structure.
The consensus among scholars is probably not.
Probably not, after all that.
Direct literary dependence is highly unlikely. The influence is much more likely to be indirect. It was filtered through the first-century Hellenistic education system, a cultural phenomenon known as paideia.
Explain paideia for us.
Paideia was the rigorous educational and cultural system that shaped the Greek-speaking elite. It involved studying rhetoric, literature, philosophy, and history.
It was the curriculum.
Right. By the time Luke is writing in the late 1st century, the methodological standards established by Thucydides centuries earlier had become the air that educated historians breathed.
It was the standard intellectual toolkit.
Exactly. To write serious history, you adopted the Thucydidean posture even if you hadn't memorized his specific texts.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? It means Luke took the absolute highest academic standards of his day, the Thucydidean model of rigorous investigation, the rhetorical weight of speeches, the analytical framing of societal conflict, and he hacked it.
He repurposed it completely.
He took the operating system of Greco-Roman history, the cultural language of the elite, and he used it to run a completely different program, a story about divine redemption through a crucified Messiah.
That synthesis captures the dynamic perfectly. Luke Acts and Thucydides share a remarkable amount of cultural and historiographical DNA.
They really do.
They both value eyewitness investigation. They both use carefully composed speeches to interpret the hidden meaning of history. They both meticulously analyze the breakdown of society.
Yet their ultimate goals cannot be further apart.
Not at all.
Thucydides wrote to provide secular, political utility for statesmen trying to navigate a dark world governed by human self-interest. Luke wrote to provide redemptive, divine assurance for believers navigating a world being radically transformed by the resurrected Christ.
And realizing that doesn't diminish the Bible's uniqueness at all.
If anything, it highlights how early Christian writers brilliantly engaged with the highest intellectual standards of their era.
They were playing at the highest level.
They didn't retreat from the intellectual marketplace into an isolated religious bubble. They walked right into the center of the Areopagus, using the culture's own sophisticated tools to make their case.
Just like looking at those ancient Roman stones and the foundation of the modern skyscraper.
Yes, the old tools are holding up a completely new reality.
It demonstrates a profound literary and cultural adaptability.
Exactly. And I want to leave you, the listener, with this final provocative thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
If the author of Luke Acts utilized the cutting-edge historical frameworks of his era, the Thucydidean conventions, to make divine events credible and authoritative to a first-century audience, what would be the equivalent today?
Oh, that's a great question.
If Luke were writing his gospel right now in our era, what modern genre, what medium or narrative framework would he use to give you that exact same certainty?
Would it be a highly produced, long-form investigative documentary?
Or maybe a rigorously peer-reviewed data analysis, a decentralized, crowdsourced open ledger?
What is our culture's ultimate standard for historical truth?
Exactly. And how would the story of redemptive history inhabit it? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.